I, I'm not educated to be a Excalibur of biblical apologist. And what that means is I don't have the background to slay every dragon when it comes to, so what's that about in the Bible? I do have pretty reasonable background regarding how a Jew would build an argument or build a case, maybe not an argument, build a case, and how they would tell a story. That's important when you read the book of Hebrews. This is not a Gentile guy writing to other Gentiles. We don't have a book in the New Testament like that. This is not a Jewish guy writing to Gentiles. We have quite a few books, letters in the New Testament where that's the case. This is a Jew writing to Jews in a style that was Jewish. Now, why is that important? Well, for me, when you, in Hebrews 11, you come to verse 25, he chose to be mistreated, and we're talking about Moses now, along with the people of God. I don't know, the mistreatment piece really doesn't show up in the book of Exodus. You can extrapolate the fact that when he left Pharaoh's court and decided to align himself as a Jew, there could have been some kind of at least difficulty in that. But mistreatment, I don't know. I think a Jew would write that, though, along with the people of God, rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. So much can be made of that and has been. And the parallel there is that's human nature, isn't it? To go for the fleeting pleasures of sin instead of the hard work of following Christ and living within God's design. Well, so Moses served to the Jew, and you got to remember, who are the biggest characters in the Jewish story? I mean, the heroes, absolute heroes of the Jewish story. Abraham as the father. Moses would have been on the second tier only to Abraham because he was the lawgiver and the leader. He was the one who led them out of captivity. Now, Moses then has a seat of honor in the pantheon of Jewish heroes. Verse 26, he regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ. Wait a second. Last time I talked about this a teeny bit, I don't think Moses was aware of Christ. And yet, on this side of Calvary, when you look back at what Moses did and what his motives were, turns out, I think, just my opinion, Moses did these things, and in his mind, this was for God, Yahweh, the God whose name was so sacred that it couldn't even be spoken. The I Am, the God that Moses had a firsthand, up close and personal encounter with. Okay, turns out by serving him wholeheartedly, not perfectly, but wholeheartedly, we have to believe, if we're Trinitarian, we have to believe that he was serving Christ. Okay. I believe that Moses serves as a great example of a person who followed God's design in his life against sometimes overwhelming and seemingly insurmountable odds. Verse 27, by faith, he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. Well, wait a minute. I thought that was exactly why he left Egypt. Because he had, you remember the story? He had killed an Egyptian slave master, and there were other Hebrews who knew this, and that news would have pretty quickly gotten back to Pharaoh, so he ran. But his faith in God, we don't get a whole big picture of this in the Exodus account. We don't read there about Abraham's great faith in God in spite of the fact that he was now a man with a price on his head. I do think he believed God would take care of him, but here's an interesting thing, and I think this is kind of a Jewish thing. You've probably seen all kinds of jokes and memes, but yeah, God will take care of you, but there's got to be this partnership where you do smart things to take care of you in partnership with God and his providence. Okay, so there he was. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. Well, he encountered God in a way that no other human being ever had or has since that time. Only Jesus encountered God in a more tangible way. And one of the things that kept Moses in the fight was this fact that he saw him who is invisible. Now, where did he see him? I think it began on the mountain with the burning bush that burned but wasn't consumed, where he was commissioned by God to go back to Pharaoh and tell him, let my people go, where he had this little bit of at least a disagreement with God, maybe even a little bit of an argument with God. I'm not the one. I have a speech problem. And yet God said, I'm sending you. Well, verse 28, by faith he kept the Passover and the application of blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. Got to know the story. Maybe you do, but if you don't, I'd love to tell this story as well. After Moses and his brother Aaron had confronted Pharaoh, and there had been 9 plagues, each plague getting more intense. And after each of these plagues, Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he said, no, you can't go. There was one last plague, and God told Moses, and Moses told all of Israel, all of the Jews who were there captive as slaves in Egypt, here's what you must do. Gather your family under the one roof, and then you butcher a lamb without defect. You take the blood of that lamb, you dip a branch of hyssop in it to use as a brush, and then you brush that blood on the doorpost and door frames of your home. Because that night, Any home that didn't have that covering would experience the death of the firstborn. But all those homes with the blood, this death would pass over them. When I first told this story to my junior church kids, the older kids went, because they'd heard of Passover, but I don't think anybody ever explained to them that that's what it's about. The death angel passed over them. The destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. Because we weren't there, it may be a little hard for us to get a grasp on this. We're not talking about 40 or 50,000 Jews. We're talking about a community that would have been, well, what we know is there were 650,000 men. Odds favor that there would have been an equal number of women. Now you're up to 1,200,000. And that's not counting children. This is a huge community of people. The Egyptian communities were no less large. And every single one of those families in the Egyptian community had the death of a firstborn. Every one of those families. We've never known anything as horrible as that. We've known some horrible things, but we've never known that. Okay. Verse 29, by faith the people passed through the Red Sea as on dry land. But when the Egyptians tried to do so, they were drowned. Now, boy, you just go back and read the first, 18 or 19 chapters of the book of Genesis, and you get story after story. When Pharaoh finally said, get out, after the death of his firstborn, the Jews left. God had predisposed their Egyptian neighbors to give them all kinds of things, including gold and silver. Slaves wouldn't have had that stuff. But their Egyptian neighbors, somehow God predisposed them, and they gave that and other things as well. And the king's court, Pharaoh's court, said, get out. So they did. And they journeyed to the Red Sea, which is a sizable body of water, and served as a boundary, a limit. And it looked like it was going to be a problem because Pharaoh changed his mind. No. We're not going to let these people go. That's free labor. We're not going to, nope. So he and his army chase after them. The Israelites see them coming and they're full of fear, as I would be if I was one. And Moses said to God, what are we going to do here? And God said, you just need to be still and watch me deliver. And so he put the cloud of his presence, which on one side was a burning fire, on the other, in this instance, was a huge cloud, so that the Israelites had light all through the night. The Egyptians had no light at all. And during the night, God parted the sea, and the Israelites walked through that sea. Now, that wasn't like a 15, 20-minute thing, 2-hour thing. I've never tried to transport 1.5 million people with kids and livestock. I think it took the night. They got to the other side, and God lifted the cloud, and Pharaoh and his army chased them in. And And when they were in that dried seabed, God withheld his what he had done to keep the waters separate, and the waters fell on them, and they drowned. His army was decimated. And I read an article recently that they, at the bottom of the Red Sea, have found chariot wheels, which, for all intents, and after scrutiny, scientific scrutiny, these were the kinds of chariot wheels that Pharaoh's army would have used. Okay, went over time. Holy cow. See you next time on So Care with Stevie Boy.